Hello everybody! 2 reviews in a day! Woo! For today I am reviewing another short story anthology, Blood Drops by W.B. Welch. Woo! And like I said in the previous short story anthology review, I review each short story individually and give them a mark out of 5. After that, I take the average rating and that's how I work the short story anthology. It's a bit of a longer review because of it, but hey, you get to know what I thought of each of the stories. So before I get into this, I do have to make one little confession. I don't much like horror. It's not that I think it's scary; it's that I think it's boring. A lot of modern horror tends to use a lot of the same tropes, cliches, characters, storylines, plots, etc., etc. So it's actually kind of the reason why I have a hard time getting into Stephen King or Clive Barker or H.P. Lovecraft because I've seen it all before. It might not have been them, and they were very revolutionary for their time, but eventually you gotta take a step back and go, yeah, okay, I've seen this so many times. Then yeah, it makes horror very hard to get into. I just need that before I need to get that out of the way before I uh, get into this review because it lets you know where my headspace is at with the genre, and it kind of gives some levity as to why I think the way I do about these stories. So, without further ado, let's get into this. The first short story is called Her, and it's creepy as fuck. You know, you got this girl who she's really into this other girl. She brings her home, they sleep together, and then it's a whole murder suicide thing. And there's no possible way that I can describe this story while doing it justice. It is very, very well written. It is super creepy, and it definitely hits the mark. This story is a 5 out of 5. The second story is Undo. And this one's not so much scary, but exceptionally heartbreaking. It is so hard to read this story because right off the hop, this guy bumps this woman in a stairwell and she drops her baby down 4 flights of stairs. And you get to see her heartache, her just the horror that goes through her mind because of it. And wow, 5 stars, five out of 5 with this one. The next story is Slipping, and it's about this woman who was very, very much abused in her childhood, is a straight up alcoholic, and is exceptionally anorexic. She doesn't eat, she doesn't really do much of anything, really. Like, eventually she stops drinking, but that's just because of the anorexia, till she starts to wither away into almost nothing. Just before she's about to die, this being comes to her, not to help her, not to save her or anything. He just likes watching people die. And something snaps her out of it, and she actually starts to turn her life around. The It actually has a very suiting ending for what it is. It's very well written. I wasn't paying too much attention at the start of the story, so I had to go back and read it again. But that's on me. That's not on the story. It's actually very well laid out. Um, I thought the monster wanting to see people die was a little iffy, but it's not really out of place. It's just I just don't think it really worked as much as the story wanted it to. So Slipping gets a 4 out of 5. It's a pretty good story. It's still very good. It's just not 5 out of 5. So before I get into this next story, I do have to say that monsters are not scary. One of the most horrific things about horror is people versus people, which it's what people are willing to do to each other. That's actually why Undo and Her were so effective with me. This next one, Siren, actually deals with a monster, but you don't see it from the victim's perspective, you see it from the monster's perspective. Which is not something that I actually see done very often, and it's done very, very well, and done very effectively. Like, this monster is actually kind of scary just due to how little remorse it actually has. It's scary because it's capable of human thought and human function. It looks human, it acts human, but it doesn't feel the same way that a human would under the same circumstances, which makes it terrifying. Siren is a 5 out of 5 purely for that reason. It is done so well. The next story, Alone in the House, actually works on sort of a primal fear of just being alone. And actually giving it relevance. Basically, this woman is by herself in her home. Her husband and child are off, I think on a vacation or something like that. I don't fully remember. But, she's home alone, just enjoying herself, relaxing, and then comes bedtime, and she hears someone downstairs. She goes to investigate, she's attacked, she breaks free, and sees that it's kind of like a smoke being. Basically a person made of smoke and cloud and stuff like that, and she books it the fuck out of there. And that's basically the story. It's done very well. It's definitely a very effective in terms of its primal fears of loneliness. And while the character herself is not feeling any sort of loneliness or anything like that, at least not from what I could gather, it's still very, very well done. So I'm going to give this one a 4 out of 5. I think the ending was a little too quick, but far from that, it's done really, really quite well. The next story is Antics. Basically, these two kids are playing. This one grabs a sharp utensil and starts running around with it. And she's like, well, and her sister's like, well, she's going to hurt herself or somebody else with this thing. So I should probably put a stop to it. The kid with the knife swings, hits a cushion. Everything seems to be okay until they see blood and guts pouring from their chair. And yeah. I'm not entirely sure just what's supposed to be going on there. If the chair itself was kind of alive or if someone was posing as their chair. Either way, that's fucking terrifying. That's horrifying. And yeah, this is a 4 out of 5. Well, I definitely would have liked a bit more of a concrete conclusion to it. It definitely hits its mark. Very, very well. House arrest. How's the best way to put this? The Happening done properly. Done in probably the best possible way that it could have been done. 5 stars. Like, it was really good. And the character's not very sympathetic either, so you don't really feel bad for her when she gets eaten alive by plants. Mall food. So, this one I've got a bit of a bias toward because this is literally my favorite W.B. Welch short story. I have a card here signed by her. Yeah. It's my favorite short story from her, so it's a straight up 5 out of 5. But there's a reason for this. Remember before when I mentioned that horror at its best is people versus people, the bad things that people are willing to do to other people? This is probably one of the best renditions of that I have seen. It's short, it's simple, it's to the point, and it definitely gets its point across very, very effectively. Even with some level of ambiguity to it. It's an exceptionally great short story for being so short. Like, it's 4 paragraphs long. It does its job very, very well. The next short story, Meat Aisle, is basically cannibalism becoming mainstream. It's something that has become an acceptable thing, and people can't go crazy for it because they've got drugs and they've got stuff to make sure that people don't go crazy with it. Woo! I actually kind of enjoyed the short story. It answered the questions that I was having with it as I was reading it, so I've got no problems with it. It's effective. It's not scary by any means, but it's definitely a pressing thought concern, especially when it comes down to food production, stuff like that. It's a very Soylent Green style short story, and it's effective. It's just more out in the open than what Soylent Green was. So, yeah, this one I'm going to give it a 4 out of 5. It was good. It was pretty good. The Water Stain is a short story that takes place in this woman's house. Basically, this water stain starts to resemble a hand. And shit starts going wrong. And, yeah, just... it's no good. She eventually just books it out of there. Her landlady's all like, "Yeah, I'm going to ruin you," and stuff like that. And she goes in to try and renovate the place, and eventually dies, and the landlady's hand goes missing. It's not a very scary story, but it's definitely fairly decent. It's definitely probably my least favorite of the stories, and I'm probably going to have to give it a 3 out of 5. Like, it definitely doesn't hit as many marks as the others. But, I mean, I still enjoyed it. It's not a 1 or a 2 or anything like that. It's still enjoyable. It just doesn't hit any of the marks that the other stories have hit. So, Heart Problems. This one is actually kind of scary. This one's actually kind of creepy. It's basically Jeffrey Dahmer's roommate. He's a creepy person. Or she? I think it's a she. I think I remember it being a she. Might be a he. Regardless, the main character is this serial killer, and the MC and Dahmer end up meeting. They were planning on killing each other. They actually end up becoming friends, and Dahmer gets caught while the main character is out and about, and while all that's going on, it eventually actually ends up leading into the main character's arrest, because the main character kind of got sloppy and decided to attack in an area where there's been a lot of rapes, and there's naturally going to be a eventual police bust there, and yeah, the main character gets caught. It's a very, very well written story, and when it's read by W.B. Welch, which she had a video of it for a while, might be on her Instagram still. I don't know. You might have to go down quite a ways to find it. I'm not entirely sure how active she is on Instagram. If it's anything like Twitter, she's fairly active. But yeah, it's definitely a very chilling read, especially when being read by the author. So, Heart Problems gets a 5 out of 5 from me. Lavu, I think I'm pronouncing that right, is the next short story, and it's basically about this immortal creature who takes people's skins and wears them, and that's how he gets out and about. That's how he's able to communicate with people, so on and so forth. Well, he takes this person's skin and is eventually abducted by this woman's daughter. And yeah, it's an interesting read. It's definitely not my favorite of it. It's interesting. Don't get me wrong. It's not it's a good read. It's 4 out of 5 worthy. Like it made me go, huh? It's actually not a bad idea, and go from there. So, yeah, it's a 4 out of 5. The next short story is actually my second favorite of this collection, The Birth, where this woman helps death give birth. It's an interesting concept that I actually really enjoyed, even so much as thinking about. It's not something that I would have ever put together, and I love the concept. It's a 5 out of 5 for me. I loved it. The next short story, and I think the longest of the short stories, is The Look. And this one is not a horror story. Have you ever read Lolita? That's probably all I really need to say there. This 15-year-old girl comes on to this 30-year-old guy and they eventually fall in love and all that, and they're together. And yeah. Her father finds out, he kicks the shit out of him, and he's like, and then the father's all like, well, now I can't can't get the guy arrested because then there's the whole assault thing, blah blah blah, and yeah, it's a kind of a creepy read in the non-horror sense, but at the same time, it's also very very well written, and I definitely did not enjoy reading it. It's certainly an enjoyable read. It's creepy as fuck, and it's definitely a social faux pas for that sort of thing, and highly illegal for pedophilia and all that. So, yeah, I'm going to give the story a 5 out of 5 just because it is that well written. And I'm probably not going to talk about this story again. The next story, Love/Death, I think is about this lady who dies and ends up having sex with death. I think that's what happens. Can't entirely be sure. I think that's what happens. I don't know. It's kind of a forgettable story, if I'm being perfectly honest. So I'm gonna give it a 3 out of 5 just because it's forgettable. It's definitely not a bad short story. I definitely enjoyed reading it. I mean, I had to come back and reread it, and it being kind of forgettable is why I had to go back and reread it, and why it's only getting a 3 out of 5. The next story, Beneath the Surface, follows these two women. One falls off a bridge, and she's kind of hurt and needs a bit of help. So her friend goes down to give her a hand, and they're both drugged down and into the water. Very short, very sweet, very to the point story. Not really much I can say about it, really. It's interesting. I'm gonna give it a 4 out of 5. There's nothing wrong with it. Nighttime Terror, the next short story, was kind of weird. You got this woman who's bleeding out. Her husband is trying to figure out what's going on. There's sirens coming. He's like, it's okay. We'll be at the hospital soon enough. It'll be okay. You'll survive. It's all good. And she's like, no, it's not going to be all good. And he goes to check the door, and he comes back, and there's a bunch of little elves drinking her blood. It's weird. It's very, very weird. I didn't really have much of a connection to any of the characters or anything like that, so I'm going to give this one a 3 out of 5. It's not... It's not my least favorite, but it's definitely not a great one, to be perfectly honest. The story definitely could have done well with a bit more of an explanation. So yeah. But anyway, the last short story... that's the one that... The Girl in the Pink Coat. This one actually also kind of deals on some primal fears of losing someone very close to you. And child abductions. This book's just a bundle of laughs. But yeah, this girl's twin goes missing after she buys this pink coat. And yeah, that's basically the story. They eventually find out who did it. They eventually find her body. And there's not really much more to say about it, at least story-wise. It was a very, very well-written story. It definitely hit home the way it should. I think that kind of story could be considered a full-on crime novel with enough expansion on it. But also I think that the short story is all that it really needed to be, too. So I'm going to give this one a 5 out of 5, because it really was all that it needed to be, despite having the potential to go bigger. It just didn't really need to. It's very well written. The characters are very, very real. And it just works. It's a good short story. I really liked it. So all in all, Blood Drops is a full-on 8 out of 10. It's a very, very well done short story collection. It's a short story collection, and, sometimes the short story is going to drag other short stories down in terms of ratings and stuff like that. But this one is very, very enjoyable. I definitely greatly loved every moment of it. Even the short stories that I didn't really care for as much, definitely... I still came away with something. I definitely still came away enjoying myself. I never really wanted to put the book down, so that's definitely a big plus in this. And yeah, 8 out of 10. Very, very good short story collection. And yeah, that's about all I got for you guys. See you later.